north and the east. The wind does ease a little overnight and it changes directions subtly, but for most it's light winds, clear skies and with cold air in place, temperatures falling once again. Widely below freezing across much of the UK and in parts of southern England as low as -5 Celsius, so in some places the coldest night of the winter. But in the north and the west, by the early hours I think we're going to start to see a bit more cloud arrive from the Atlantic. That will limit the frost in the northwest, and it'll be a grey day in western Scotland with some drizzle over the hills. Elsewhere, brighter skies, the best of the sunshine in the east, but that cloudier look will become more prevalent through Saturday and Sunday, limiting frost and fog by night, but staying dry.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Has he gone yet? Ooh, no, they think it's going to take one more push. They're meeting round at Dominic's pad. I think it's, what is it, about 8:30 tonight? I think Emmanuel Macron is going to join them by Zoom and that. But they figured it's one more party, one more work event, we'll take care of it. We'll get to all of the Boris stuff and also to some of the footer page 37 news stories, the peripheral trivia like looming war in Europe, that kind of thing. And of course, the most important part of the show, your questions and comments. Let me know what's on your mind, either re-Boris or beyond Boris. You can do it by email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or by tweet @gbnews. Stump the Steyn is coming up too. But first, as always, Tamsin Roberts has the news.
Mark, thank you. Here are the top stories from the GB newsroom. The Health Secretary says the Omicron variant is in retreat as he confirmed plans to lift Plan B restrictions in England next week. At a COVID briefing this evening, Sajid Javid says the guidance to work from home will end immediately. Face masks will also no longer be mandatory in classrooms from tomorrow, and they won't be required in public places from next Thursday. Speaking to GB News, Joe Campion from the National Deaf Children's Society says the news is a relief.
We've always said that public health needs to be a priority, but obviously the specific needs of deaf children matter too. And this has been a really difficult time for them, and they've waited a really long time for it to be safe for face masks to not be used in classrooms. And so we're just relieved on their behalf that they no longer need to face this really challenging situation.
The MP for Bury South has defected from the Conservatives to the Labour Party. Christian Wakeford says his former party is trying to defend the indefensible and doing so gladly over what he calls far too many issues. The Prime Minister claims the Tories will regain the seat at the next election, but former Brexit Secretary David Davis says it's time for Boris Johnson to step down.
I expect my leaders to shoulder the responsibility for the actions they take. Yesterday, he did the opposite of that. So I'll remind him of a quotation altogether too familiar to him of Leo Amery to Neville Chamberlain. You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
Meanwhile, Number 10 says Boris Johnson expects to lead the Tories in the next general election and will fight any vote of no confidence launched against him. A vote could be triggered if 54 letters are submitted by Conservative MPs to the 1922 committee. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer insists the Downing Street party fallout means the Prime Minister's now too distracted. But the Prime Minister defended his position, saying he believes his government achieved more during the pandemic than any European country. British Airways has joined Emirates and Air India in cancelling a number of US flights over 5G safety concerns. It follows fears that transmissions from signal towers near US airports could disrupt planes' navigation systems. BA cancelled flights from Heathrow to 5 American airports. The airline says it will continue to review its schedule and apologise to customers for the disruption. US-based aviation journalist Greg Pollock told GB News why carriers are concerned about the signals.
It might affect what's called the radar altimeter, which essentially more or less tells the pilot how far away he is from the ground in bad weather, particularly when visibility is not that good.
This is GB News on TV, online and DAB+ radio. Now, though, it's back to Mark Steyn.
Welcome along. My thanks to Patrick Christys for holding the fort. The boy stood on the burning deck whence all but he had fled. Speaking of which, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is being done in by an opportunist alliance of Ramonas and backroom boys screwed over by Boris Johnson, such as Dominic Cummings. Backbench Conservative MPs are not always the sharpest calculators of their own best interests when it comes to regicide. You have to be pretty far gone to reckon that Jeremy Hunt, do you remember him? He got into the final round. Oh, there he is. Yeah, look at that guy. Or Tom Tugendhat. He's another guy they're tipping for the top. You have to be pretty far gone to think that Jeremy Hunt or Tom Tugendhat is going to save you. Who's next as the bookmaker's favourite? How about Anna Soubry? We haven't heard from her in a while since she founded UK Change, uk.change.uk change. Would Anna be willing to return to public life to save the country? Back in the real world, Chairman Xi and the lads on the Politburo are trying to keep a straight face. Sir Keir Starmer has Chinese intelligence assets running his backbenchers. And that's a smaller story than wine bottles in a suitcase? Well, yes, because lockdown shrank our world. In March 2020, you'd been planning your summer holes on a sun-drenched Mediterranean beach, but then they made that illegal. So you shrunk your aims, you reduced your ambitions, and you were hoping you might be permitted to leave the flat for a second half hour to see your boyfriend from Tier 3. Lockdown shriveled our horizons so that those bottles in the suitcase loom like giant Jeroboams stalking the political landscape, and no one can see beyond to Brussels or the Ukraine or Hong Kong. And so we have the present circus. Dancing on Boris Johnson's grave is the ultimate BYOB midnight rave. Nobody needs to pretend it's a working event. It's just partying till dawn. But in the cold grey morning after, whoever's next is going to be presiding over the worst inflation rate since the 1980s, a soaring cost of living. I don't even know what that phrase means after 2 years of non-living. A union in name only as Brussels hardens the border in the Irish Sea, And sitting in number 10, don't worry because there'll be some, quote, safe pair of hands, which translated out of Westminsterese means a colourless non-entity in thrall to all the conventional wisdom whom the average red wall voter has never heard of until he goes to the palace to kiss hands. And that's before you take into account the political realities of this. Disaffected Downing Street minions and their chums in the media sat on these conga liner go-go stories for a year, year and a half, 2 years, until they could do maximum damage. Are you entirely confident they haven't already banked enough shocking exclusives to do for Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak? Consequential politicians become adjectives. Thatcherite, Blairite. If there is such a thing as Johnsonism, it's mere style. The Etonian bluffer who through sheer heartiness can jolly lifelong Labour voters into taking a flyer on a Tory toff. The style was impressive though. Boris Johnson, by sheer personality, has held together an ever more incoherent, if not deranged, coalition. He's the Michael Collins of the British Free State. He's Clement Attlee on taxation. He's Greta Thunberg with a beer belly. He's Neil Ferguson, Professor Pants Down when it comes to the downing of the pants, but not latterly when it comes to lockdown. Pants down, yes. Lockdown not so fast. Which of the various Tory factions is likely to emerge triumphant? The ones who want an end to high-tax net zero Toryism? Or the ones who want a neutered, crippled or maybe even reversed Brexit? And on useless lockdowns, a return to something more Emmanuel Macron-like, Justin Trudeaupian? The media and the civil service and the European Commission and Monsieur Macron himself know what they want. A dullard who quotes follow the science on lockdowns and follows the Eurocrats on Brexit and backstops and loses the next election to Labour. The Tories are damned if they do. That's to say, the new guy will be at best back down to Theresa May's 2017 seat count when Lady May required the votes of the DUP to survive, except by the next election I'd be surprised if there were enough DUP seats to save the Tories. So the Conservatives are certainly damned if they do, but they might not necessarily be damned if they don't. Today, Boris Johnson tried to do what he should have done 2 years ago, put clear blue water between him and Nicola Sturgeon. Leo Varadkar, Justin Trudeau, Scott Morrison, Jacinda Ardern, Emmanuel Macron, Mark Rutte of the Netherlands, Governor Newsom of California, and all the rest of them.
I've always said that we would open up the country as soon as the data supports it. And earlier today, that's why we announced 3 important changes as part of our return.
Get rid of Sajid. That wasn't the little video. I was hoping to have Boris announcing that it was an end to Plan B, an end to lockdown, an end to masks, and all that. Let's see if we can get this one right. Today, David Davis channeled Leah. I don't want Sajid. The only thing more boring than a speech by Sajid Javid is a speech by Sajid Javid pledging full support to the Prime Minister. Today, David Davis channeled Leo Amery channeling Oliver Cromwell's words to the Long Parliament.
I expect my leaders to shoulder the responsibility for the actions they take. Yesterday, he did the opposite of that. So I'll remind him of a quotation altogether too familiar to him of Leo Amery to Neville Chamberlain. You have sat there too long for all the good you have done. In the name of God, go.
I respect David Davis, and I would rather have had him as the Tory victor instead of David Cameron. And he was on this show last week, and the conversation went very pleasantly. But really, channeling Oliver Cromwell, it's hard to watch all these born-again roundheads when they're the guys who voted for the ultimate cavalier. Boris Johnson is not going to change. Here he is at his finest. Yeah, look at that. He's let's just run this till the top of the hour and into Dan Wootton. I could watch this for hours. That's Boris at it. Boris is always going to be as you've just seen, a corpulent, lumbering, arrhythmic, all-time lowest score on Strictly, the Incredible Hulk doing the lambada with Marvel Girl in Avengers 73, postulating priapic blob of mendacity. Yet the priapic blob can still move nimbly enough to prevent them getting close enough to shove the lightsaber up him, because of his indestructible sense of self-preservation, which is what remains when his pants have fallen down, his expensive hairpiece has disintegrated, and net zero is no longer an emissions target but is likely seat count in northwest England. Boris today, with his answer on an end to the remaining coronavirus restrictions, didn't sound like a bloke preparing to throw in the towel. What do you reckon? Can Johnson survive? Should Johnson survive? What does he need to do to survive? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. Kathy Gingell is the founder of the excellent website, The Conservative Woman, and we're always glad to see her. Kathy, my general take on this is that if they do succeed in getting rid of Boris Johnson, whoever follows from a Conservative point of view, setting aside his the fact that he's a sex fiend and he's hot for all the climate change rubbish and all the rest of it, but that whoever they replace him with is likely to be worse on things like Brexit and the Irish backstop and on taxes and all kinds of other things. What's your take on who, if anyone, is going to succeed him?
Well, I think he's there to stay. I mean, he's the great faker, so I don't think he's toast. I mean, talk about Carter beat the devil. Boris would beat the devil every time. I don't fall for it, but, it's remarkable in this morally liquid country how many people love his moral liquidity. I think the problem is we never have a really serious discussion about virtue ethics, do we? You've come straight in, and I hate to do this to you, Mark, on the question of political expediency, and it's what appears to be a moral conundrum. We might get somebody worse, we might get someone more like Macron, we might get a boring Jeremy Hunt, whatever. But this is basically a cowardly argument, and why I like David Davis, and although he's done what he did today far too late. As you said, Boris drew that blue line today far too late. It is the principled position. And ever since Tony Blair, we've lost sight of any principle at all in government. So there will be no trust. How do we know that Boris's great braggadocio speech today was truthful at all? We've got no idea. He's changed his mind. He's changed his position so many times. So I'm old-fashioned old David Davis.
Well, you're right to be that, but don't forget, this is the part. Don't forget, I feel 137 years old because I can remember how Mrs. Thatcher felt about the slightest sexual indiscretion, and this party voted for a guy who can't reliably say how many kids he has and who was living with his current girlfriend without benefit of clergy in number 10, which no Conservative leader or any kind of Prime Minister has done before. So in a sense, the David Davis thing is fine, but it's hard to complain that the guy is a serial liar, an unprincipled, amoral bounder, when you knew all that and you voted for him to be your leader anyway.
Well, yes, but I think his moral liquidity goes well beyond his sexual whatever shenanigans, I don't know, his multiple wives. I mean, it goes into what I call his book of contrition. He does very good contrition. He does shameless contrition. And of course, that is exactly what the abusive husband will do. And we are all willingly the abusive wife of this man. I mean, there's nothing to be done until people get a grip on their own, in quotes, enjoying their own victimhood. But that's why we do have to go back to some basic principles and try and reassert them and say none of this debate in Parliament touched on any of the real issues today. In the middle of his statement, he just dropped in this casual redefinition of liberty that nobody seems to have noticed, that is going to be medically contingent on vaccines. Great. Nobody has challenged his whole vaccine narrative, which is one that actually has collapsed in any evidential sense. But nobody in Parliament, left or right or middle, chose to challenge it. So this is sort of living, weird theatre that doesn't relate to reality at all.
Oh, that's the definition of politics in a mass media age, though, isn't it? And that's what he was very good at. The fact is, there's lots of Tories who are angry about the so-called the COP26, this ludicrous nonsense of a so-called Conservative Prime Minister going for net zero, of a Conservative Prime Minister who's imposed the highest tax regime since Clement Attlee, and even Attlee wouldn't have imposed it if we hadn't just gone through 6 years of the Second World War. And so we have a rightful Tory restiveness, but at the same time they figure that it's not just that the a transactional thing complaints about it, but that the next guy is likely to be much more like a conventional wishy-washer, soft on Brexit. So better stick with the A-principled, amoral, hollow husk than taking a flyer on the amoral, unprincipled husk of the day after tomorrow. They're all like that now, aren't they?
Well, they are, but the fact is you don't know. You don't know what the future will be. So it's a bit like with a sort of mafia cartel. You say, I won't, imprison mafia boss number 1 in case mafia boss number 2 gets too powerful and is worse. It's true in a way what you say. It's a pretty rotten argument. And that's a sign of where we're at. The thing is, we know that Boris doesn't believe anything he said. I don't think we've ever had such a master of the art of fakery. And that's what's actually, in a way, particular. You sort of know where you are with boring Starmer, boring Jeremy Hunt. You can have a sort of opposition to them and you challenge them. Boris is certainly slippery. Does he believe anything at all? I really don't know. I suspect not.
No, that's very... I'll just throw this out there, but I'm in favour of what I call the Bonner-Law solution. Andrew Bonner-Law was the first Canadian Prime Minister of the United Kingdom because Commonwealth citizens are allowed to sit in the UK Parliament and sit in the Cabinet. Tony Abbott, the former Australian Prime Minister, is actually on the UK Board of Trade at the moment. And I'd be much more if we're going to actually topple. If we're going to have a palace coup, I think we should think outside the box and say to Tony Abbott, "Why don't you step up? You had a short reign as Aussie Prime Minister. You're in the prime of your life. Why don't you do the job? It's perfectly permitted under, as I said, under constitutional practice. He's a subject of the Crown, and he can be Prime Minister. And he's more Tory than most of these guys they're proposing."
It's an absolutely fantastic idea. I'm all for it. Probably 1 out of the majority of this population. I'm behind you on that. What people don't get is that Tony Blair pretended to do a reverse takeover of the Tories. So Tony Blair then became every Tory's hero. The best Tory Prime Minister we didn't have. All that's rubbish. He didn't. He expanded the state incredibly and into our private lives incredibly. Along come the Tories and they think, we'll be clever. We'll do a reverse takeover of Labour. They have done a reverse takeover of Labour. There isn't really, apart from a few people like Steve Baker, maybe David Davis, who's strong on liberty and understand principles, there isn't an actual Conservative left in the Parliamentary Party. And I will, along with Tony Abbott, let's make Steve Baker his deputy.
No, and that's actually a critical point. What you said, real leadership real leadership, which is what Mrs. Thatcher did and what President Reagan did, is you don't move towards you don't steal your opponent's clothes. You don't go burrowing. You don't do some pantomime horse version of the opposition by moving to the centre, so-called. You move the centre towards you. That's what real leaders do. And I know, as you said, people are very antipathetic towards the colonial types, but I would, I'd say you get more chance of that from Tony Abbott than you would from Liz Truss. But thank you as always. It's great. It's absolutely great to see you, Kathy, and we shall see whether anything more than mere opportunism survives. But he seems to have had a better day than he did yesterday, so he's in a slightly better position than you want. Now, coming up next, I'll get to your reaction on all that. I'm serious about the Tony Abbott thing, by the way. GB Views at gbnews.uk. You can also ask me anything for Stump the Steyn at GB News. For you Twitter aficionados, don't touch that dial. I'll be coming right back with your take on Boris Johnson and all the rest of the day's news.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. I meant what I said about my so-called Bonner Law solution, reference to the first Canadian Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, almost exactly a century ago. And if you don't fancy Tony Abbott, there's always Maxime Bernier, leader of the Parti Populaire du Canada, the People's Party of Canada. Not sure how many Tories would be comfortable with a Conservative Party leader with a French accent, and I'm not sure how many snooty metropolitan Liberals at Highgate dinner parties would be comfortable with a Prime Minister with a French accent, but a ghastly provincial Quebecois accent as opposed to a metropolitan Paris accent. But these other people, I mean, if you want to commit, it's one thing to be the stupid party, as they call Conservatives, but it's another thing to be the suicide party. And if you want to be the suicide party, you can put Jonathan Hunt in there. Well, what about that other guy, Rory, whatever he was called? Anyway, Peter says, your views. The best candidate for PM is Boris Johnson, and we will not need An election for leader, says Peter. Ray on email asks, do you think Boris will actually survive as PM and win the next election? Wait a minute, I wanted you to tell me whether Boris will actually survive as PM and win the next election. Actually, I think after today, I'm inclined to think he had a better day than he did yesterday, so he may be on top of this thing. Brian on email says, I fear the Tories are about to score an own goal by ditching Boris Johnson. Truss and Sunak have no appeal to the red wall. Yeah, I would give you a golden statuette there, Brian, for today's statement of the obvious, were it not for the fact that there is no Tory backbencher capable of recognizing, oh yes, Liz Truss, that's just going to do the thing for us in those red wall constituencies. However wrong it might have been, Partygate matters more to the media and the political elite than to most ordinary people. Anonymous says Johnson needs to say, but only because he's the least crap out of a crap bunch. This is prime political analysis we're getting right here. The least crap out of a crap bunch. What he has to do, though, is ditch all the COVID bollocks, green nonsense, stop the boats and start fracking. You've just come up with what sounds awfully like a Conservative manifesto there. Alan, on this defector guy, says Starmer will drop this MP for one of his own before the next general election. Davis on For God's Sake Go. He went and got Brexit done. Not bad for a clown. Donald says the only person I can see leading with principle and not leading following public whims and has personality is Jacob Rees-Mogg. How does Jacob Rees-Mogg poll in the red wall thing? I'd like to see him perambulating through some of those red wall shopping centres. See whether he has the common touch and all that kind of thing. Keep your emails and tweets coming. Stump the Steyn is going to be right along. While we're focused on Boris Johnson's BYOB parties, Vladimir Putin is planning his own BYOB party. Bring your own blitzkrieg. He has over 125,000 troops massed on the Ukrainian border. And as the Polish foreign minister repeated today, Europe is now facing a greater likelihood of war than at any time in the last 30 years. That would mean since Bosnia. And we're thrilled to have with us Bosnia Bob, as they called the commander of UN forces back then. Bosnia Bob was more formally known as Colonel Stewart, and then he became Bob Stewart MP. He's the Tory member for Beckenham, and we're delighted to have him with us. The thinking seems to be that the ongoing diplomacy now is explicitly intended by Moscow to provide a pretext for invading Ukraine, because he's asked for demands that are never going to be met. Is that your take on it?
It is. There's absolutely no reason for Putin to... His scenario is this, that NATO is surrounding Russia and wants to do in Russia. But NATO's a defensive alliance. What Putin doesn't like is the fact that nations that were previously in the Soviet ambit, now they've been given their freedom, want to join NATO. NATO doesn't say, join us. They ask, can we join NATO? And the fact of the matter is, this is anathema to actually Moscow. And Putin is really jarred off, and he's massed all these troops on the border of Ukraine. Now, whether he's going to release them, that's another matter. By the way, they're also in Belarus, and they're also in the Crimea. If the Russians were to invade Ukraine, it would cause a huge international crisis. And actually, we can't say it, for goodness sake, because in Russia, all the people there are fed this diatribe from Putin that NATO is an offensive alliance, wants to rule Russia. So somehow or other, we've got to get our message through to the Russian people that the people that are running them are not telling the truth, that actually NATO is a defensive alliance. All its members want to be a member of it. It is not offensive. It is a defensive alliance. And that actually there is no reason for Putin to invade Ukraine that wants to be independent, wants to run its own affairs.
But Tony Blinken, I take your point that NATO is, in the formal sense, a defensive alliance. But Tony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, has been, I think the phrase saber rattling is overused. But the fact that he is actually threatening Russia with consequences. So this thing has come out of nowhere. It's 6 months since we've had an American and a NATO humiliation with the fall of Kabul. 12 hours before the Taliban took charge in Kabul, Antony Blinken, as the senior American diplomatist, was tweeting that he just had a very productive conversation with the Canadian foreign minister. He doesn't have a lot of credibility. NATO doesn't have a lot of credibility. After you've just taken 20 years to lose to goat herds with fertilizer, why would Putin be worried about Antony Blinken versus the Red Army?
Well, I think the Russians have got to be worried about actually the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians themselves are pretty competent about defending their own country. They feel this very strongly. We keep thinking we've got to be there. It's got to be, NATO nations there. But Ukraine has actually armed itself. It wants to be independent. It will fight to be independent. NATO nations, here's the problem, there is no Article 5 commitment to Ukraine. Putin knows that. So if he was to invade, you wouldn't automatically get NATO going into Ukraine. Not automatically, but there's a possibility that NATO nations might do it. It's not just Ukraine, it's Bosnia. Bosnia is being threatened by Russian actions too, through Serbia, because the Republika Srpska trying to go. And there's a timeline on that, in probably like 4 months before Republika Srpska has given notice that it's going to split from the Republic of Bosnia-Herzegovina. That is an extremely dangerous thing to do. Ukraine is a real problem. And actually, we've got a problem in the Far East insofar as China is increasingly belligerent with regard to Taiwan.
Yeah, but isn't the reason for all these situations, I go back to the credibility thing. How can you, if a superpower and an alliance and a defensive alliance has to have a deterrent capability? What deterrent capability does the United States or the UK or any of the other allies have at the moment? And I'd also make the point, you're right about the Ukrainians. They want to defend their country, but in a sense, they're in the same position as the Afghans are in, slightly differently. But the Afghans were left with a fantastic state of the Air Force and nobody who knew how to maintain it. So they couldn't use it, couldn't take off the ground and use air power against the Taliban. Right now, Washington is refusing to give Kiev the air power materials that they feel they need for exactly the same reasons.
Well, it's probably because Ukraine has not been and is not a part of NATO. But NATO, includes the Baltic states, Poland, and there will not be an invasion. I don't see an invasion of NATO territory. Ukraine has been, since I was the chief of policy at Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe in 1994, Ukraine has been something called a part of Partnership for Peace. And from Partnership for Peace, they had the wish to join NATO. But NATO nations have got to agree for them to join NATO as well. They are not a part of NATO. That does not mean we don't care about them, because the British in particular have actually armed with defensive weapons and trained Ukrainian armed forces. Now look, the Germans, even the Germans, have warned Russia that if they take action in Ukraine, the German foreign minister has said that this will have serious consequences. Well, the real serious consequences, if that was to happen, will be sanctions. I know people say sanctions might not work, but in Russia, the people that would suffer are actually the people of Russia, not the people running the country who've got huge millions, billions in the West in various banks and offshore accounts. They'll be okay, but it'll be the Russian people. Now, we've got to get the message to the Russian people somehow that if action was to be taken in Ukraine, military action was to be taken in Ukraine, the Western powers, mainly NATO, but not exclusively, might well actually set up sanctions which would hurt them. Unfortunately, they're not getting that message because the Russian media is totally dominated by the regime.
What do you say? Because it's a common response from people who worry about this situation, is that Putin obviously is disturbed by the NATO expansion eastward, whether these countries, as in the Baltic states, wish for it. The Baltic states joining NATO, from Putin's point of view, is the equivalent of Joe Biden waking up in the morning, switching on the TV and discovering that the entire British West Indies have suddenly joined the Warsaw Pact. And then Canada joins the Warsaw Pact. In other words, what Putin's, regardless of anything else, what is the purpose of moving the eastern frontier of NATO right up to the Russian border? Because as I'm sure you know, the reason that Afghanistan was never formally incorporated into the British Empire is because they were very disturbed, the British were very disturbed at the idea of having a land border with the Russian Empire. They didn't think that was going to be anything but trouble.
We had the great game, of course. Well, I have to say that when I was the chief of policy at SHAPE, I was extremely concerned about that and wrote papers about taking the Baltic states into NATO. This was before they were, saying the problem is that we've got Kaliningrad. People won't perhaps understand that Kaliningrad is Russian, and it's to the east of the Baltic states. It's an enclave which is actually stuck full of military hardware, Russian military hardware. And I was really concerned about that and said that, but that was a political decision that if they wanted to join NATO and they qualified, because you have to prove that you're democratic and there are various other qualifications, if they wanted to join NATO, they could. I was a military at the time and wasn't political, I was a colonel, and my papers would say, it doesn't make military sense because actually the Russians have got us outflanked. But I was told to shut up. That was not my decision. It was a political decision. And if free countries, want to join NATO, they were allowed to do so. My worry then, as it is now, is that actually those free countries may well actually be invaded and we wouldn't be able to do much about it in the time we had. They're not going to be invaded now. I'm really concerned about eastern Ukraine at the moment. We can kiss goodbye. We can kiss goodbye to Crimea. There's no way the Crimea will be going back to Ukraine, because as long as you've got the Russian Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol, there's no way the Russians are going to give that back. And the majority of people in the Ukraine now not only speak Russian, but largely want to be with Russia.
That's a very interesting point you made. Let me just ask you this finally. Given the domestic politics in your party right now, do you think whoever is the Prime Minister of the UK makes much difference to this situation?
Yes, it damn well does. I mean, the last thing we want now, we've got a problem in the United Kingdom. We haven't conquered COVID. There are various other economic problems and social that we've got to actually deal with. But internationally, we've got this problem in the Balkans, in Bosnia, this problem in Ukraine, and we've got the problem in Taiwan. The European Union is hamstrung. They fundamentally, one good reason for being out of the European Union is that if we were stuck in the European Union, there'd be no decision, because various European countries in the European Union have different views on what's happening in the Balkans and probably what's happening in Ukraine. So they don't have a joint policy. The Americans, on the other hand, are getting increasingly isolationist. The only country that has actually got any kind of clout and any kind of ability to do something internationally is the United Kingdom. The last damn thing we want now in our country, and I'm thinking beyond Westminster, beyond the Conservative Party, I'm thinking of my country. We need to have a Prime Minister that's in post, and we don't, right now, want to squabble in the Conservative Party as who might be Prime Minister for the next, 4, 5, 6 weeks. At this crucial time. No, better to keep what we've got, because actually we've got a Prime Minister in post and we've got ministers that actually know their brief. We have got a crisis international now. We've got problems at home. Don't change the Prime Minister right now, because no Prime Minister of this country has been dismissed because of a bloody party.
OK, there you are. Bob Stewart weighing up the consequences of bring your own bottle parties at number 10 versus the great geopolitical moves afoot in Eastern Europe and elsewhere. Before, I have to apologise for something. Is that right? I got a... Where is it? I read a tweet that had the word crap in it, and crap is apparently OK. And the word I'm not allowed to say is bollocks. So crap you can say, bollocks you can't. I'm just the airhead presenter reading what's put in the prompter before me. But I apologise if that caused any offence to you. We'll be right back with that. That's how easy it is. I haven't even been to a party and I'm apologising. We'll be right back with Niall Gardner and Stump the Steyn. GB Views at gbnews.uk. I'm blaming the people who put it in the prompter. I'm getting like Boris. It's all the minions' fault. I blame my minions. That's what I mean when I say I'm going to take responsibility. All coming up next on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Mark Steyn live on GB News TV and simultaneously live on GB News Radio, whatever your particular preference is. Niall Gardner was an aide to Mrs. Thatcher, but not one of those backstabbing ones Boris Johnson seems to surround himself with. He now runs the Margaret Thatcher Centre in Washington, and it's great to see him. Niall, what's your take from the Margaret Thatcher Centre on the present troubles roiling Mr. Johnson's ministry?
Well, Mark, firstly, thanks very much for having me on the show here. Congratulations on your new show on GB News, which is wonderful news. And with regard to Boris Johnson, in fact, I've just returned to Washington from London, and I met with a wide range of Conservative MPs, former ministers, current government officials, and so spoke to a wide spectrum of people within the Conservative Party in the upper echelons of the party. I have to say, with regard to Boris Johnson, the situation does not look good for the Prime Minister. This, in fact, looks disastrously bad for the PM. In fact, my former boss, Margaret Thatcher, would have been horrified, I think, by all these Downing Street parties. And at the very least, I think that you need to see a clear out in Downing Street of those staff responsible for all these lockdown parties in violation of the rules. After all, if the government sets these draconian policies, then you would expect officials in Downing Street, at the very least, to be following those policies. But, having said that, I do think that, we need to look at the big picture here. And many of the MPs that I spoke to are not convinced that Boris Johnson should leave Downing Street, or that he will be exiting Downing Street. In fact, I spoke to some senior, Conservative Party MPs who thought that Boris would survive this, and that goes against a lot of the conventional wisdom that we're seeing in the British press at this moment. And having met Boris, many times, I've hosted him here in Washington on a number of occasions as well. I think he is somebody who has an extraordinary ability to regenerate and to survive. And after all, he was the Prime Minister who delivered Brexit. And I think many in the Conservative Party fear that if Boris goes, the entire Brexit project may be imperiled. It could open the way for a return to power eventually of the far left Labour Party and the Scottish Nationalists as well, in some kind of coalition who would destroy Brexit. So, there are many big picture issues here behind the scenes. I'm not convinced that Boris is going to be forced out of this. But we have the May local elections coming up. They could be catastrophic for the Conservatives. That could completely change the dynamics here. So a lot of unknowns here. But I would also mention, Mark, that if you look at Boris, yes, please go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
No, you continue. You
Okay.
continue. Carry on.
Yeah, Mark,
What was your final thought?
My final thought is that if you look at Boris Johnson's track record so far as Prime Minister, it's very mixed. And I would say that if he stays as Prime Minister, he has to govern as a Conservative Prime Minister. He needs to get rid of a lot of the kind of liberal, wishy-washy policies that are out there, especially on the environmental stuff, the tax rises. And he needs to lead a Conservative Party that is 100% committed to Conservative values and principles and policies. And I hope that would be the case if Boris Johnson survives.
Well, that's actually the issue here, isn't it? A lot of people who want Conservative government are sick of all the Greta Thunberg stuff on the environment. And on the other hand, kissing up to the Greta Thunberg types hasn't got him anywhere, because Greta Thunberg isn't putting in a word for Boris. So what was the point in political terms of kissing up? He has actually got to learn a lesson here, which is not something one often says about Boris Johnson.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And, Greta's not going to be rescuing Boris Johnson here. And I think the entire sort of environmental agenda that is being pushed is hugely expensive, is counterproductive for the British economy. I think it's very unpopular as well. I don't think there's anything to be gained for the Conservatives in pushing ideas that are normally pushed forward by the left here. And I think, a key lesson for the Prime Minister to learn, if indeed he survives this, series of scandals, is that ultimately his survival will rest upon his willingness to project Conservative ideas and principles, because ultimately it will be the right of the Conservative Party that will save Boris if indeed he survives as Prime Minister. And the right of the Conservative Party wants to see the Conservative Party leading based upon Thatcherite conservative principles, not based upon ideas that some of them perhaps recycled from, New Labour and so on. So we need to see Boris Johnson really being a Churchillian, Thatcherite-style Prime Minister.
Well, there's a rather tiresome political cliche that you're familiar with in Washington that they always say, a bit of down-home, corn-pone, folksy wisdom. You got to dance with them what brung you. The ones who brung Boris to number 10 were, on the one hand, traditional Tories who, after over a decade now of Conservative prime ministers, feel the country's getting less conservative. And at some point, they're just, as in North Shropshire, they might just decide to stay home.
Yeah, I think the beating heart of the Conservative Party base is actually, still very conservative. And I think that most Conservative Party members would be in favour of a Conservative Party that moves back towards the right rather than moving to the left. I think that's where the base of the Conservative Party is. Of course, they brought on board large numbers of new voters, many of them former Labour voters who have been brought over, of course, by the prospect of Brexit. But I think that the heart of the Conservative Party, the grassroots, remains those who fundamentally believe that the Conservative Party should be about advancing, the legacy of Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher and great Conservative predecessors. That is the base of the Conservative Party at this time. It would be a huge mistake, I think, for the Conservatives to abandon the heart of Middle England. And Margaret Thatcher always used to say that in order to win elections, you have to understand the beating heart of Middle England. And I think that is absolutely 100% right here.
From your words to Boris Johnson's ears, Niall Gardner, and I wonder, from the Margaret Thatcher Foundation in Washington, I wonder if there'll be a Boris Johnson Foundation one day. He'll have to give up the partying first. Let's get in the final moments of the show to some of your Stump the Steyn questions. Tez says, what political party do you follow? Actually, you know something? I'm a bit weary of all this. I'm thinking of founding a single-issue party like Nigel's Brexit party, and I'm rather in the mood for a pre-COVID party. I'd like to actually wind the clock back to March 2020 and just get back to the pre-COVID world. It's a bit like that famous episode of Dallas where they just wrote off the last 2 seasons and the deceased Bobby Ewing just stepped into the shower with Victoria Principal again and they started anew. I'm thinking of forming the pre-COVID party. That'll do it for me, but you know what? I'll be back here tomorrow, same time, and the one and only Dan Wootton starts after the weather.
Hello again. Skies have cleared widely across the UK, and that means overnight a widespread frost, and there'll be some wintry flurries in some spots, mainly for the north of Scotland because of the Arctic wind that has arrived now behind this cold front. That cold front cleared the cloud and some outbreaks of rain earlier in the day, and now we've got clearer but colder weather across all parts. And under those widely clear skies, temperatures will rapidly fall overnight. We'll keep a bit more of a wind in the far north and east, and that wind will drive further wintry flurries into the north of Scotland and for parts of eastern England as well. But where we've got clear skies elsewhere, a widespread frost, as low as -5 across sheltered parts of Scotland. In the far north of Scotland, a bit more cloud and some of those snow flurries to begin things on Thursday, perhaps a centimetre or so at lower levels, more so on the higher ground, and likewise for the east coast of England. Soon enough, those showers ease away. Widely clear skies